think we're ready. I'm in committee right now. I'll call you back. I'm in committee, I'll call you back. Okay, good afternoon. This will be the Audits and Government Efficiency Committee, a special meeting for Tuesdays on November 1st, day after Halloween. Council members, I am chaired with my distinguished colleague, Councilmember Mitchell Englander. We have two items on the agenda, and we have representatives here for those matters. So let's start with number one, please.
Item number one, City Controller reports relative to an audit of citywide fixed assets and equipment.
Don't be shy.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Rick Taguchi, City Controller's Office. This particular audit was issued on May 3rd, 2010. The objective of the audit was to evaluate city departments' controls over fixed assets and equipment, including computer equipment. And the audit covered July 2007 through July 2009. In completing our audit, we visited 3 departments, ITA, Sanitation, and Recreation and Parks. And those departments were selected based on a variety of factors, such as the number and dollar value of their fixed assets. Some of the findings that we had, first of all, we were unable to locate a high percentage of items issued or listed in CAMS and SOS. CAMS is the Centralized Asset Management System. It's used to record fixed assets costing at least $5,000 and having a useful life over 3 years. And SOS is the Service Online System. It's used to record computer-type items. So we tried to inventory items listed in those systems. We were unable to initially locate 45% of the items selected. Eventually, departments were able to locate all but 25% of the items.
Okay.
Even if the departments were eventually able to locate all the items, there's still a problem, and the problem was that they could not easily locate those items. It took a long time to get it down to 25%. There's a couple of problems we found. Sometimes the assets have very general descriptions listed in the systems. It might just say computer equipment, it doesn't really indicate what year it is, or there's no serial number that allows.
And this would track all departments. This system tracks all departments.
All proprietary departments.
All proprietary departments. Okay. What about non-proprietary departments?
I don't know
If we have this miserable number, I wonder what it is for the others.
I do believe that Harbor's in the system. I'm not sure about DWP.
We need to figure that out. So you did.
But we only went to those 3 departments: ITA, Sanitation, and RAP.
But those aren't proprietary departments.
No. I'm saying. I'm sorry.
You said proprietary departments. So
The proprietary departments do not. DWP, Harbor, and LAWA. I'm not sure whether they use these particular systems or not.
But all other
Yes.
council control departments use the system.
Yes.
So if there's still a 25% that they couldn't locate. Originally, it was 45%, got down to 25%. So it means they can account for 75% of them, and the other 25% could have been stolen, misplaced,
Correct.
absconded.
It could have been, a lot of times they're old equipment. Sometimes the items in the system are 10, 15 years old, and maybe they were salvaged.
Isn't there a report when they salvage something, though?
A lot of times the departments don't take them off the...
But aren't they supposed to?
Yes.
See, the departments are supposed to follow the rule, but when they make up their own rule, then an audit comes out, and then the question is, did someone steal it? Did someone misappropriate it? Did someone sell it? Did someone take it for personal use? All right, continue. I found this incredibly interesting and kind of sad at the same time.
Another problem was some of the limitations in the computer systems itself. For example, the CAM system only allows the users to enter one specific location. So, for example, Recreation and Parks, at 3900 Chevy Chase Drive. They have like 8 buildings, but if you go to the fixed asset listing, it just says, for every asset that location has, it just says 3900 Chevy Chase Drive. It doesn't indicate the building number, doesn't indicate a room number, so it's kind of difficult to find the items.
Okay.
Another problem we found is that we took physical inventories of certain assets and observed assets and then tried to determine whether those assets were recorded in the system. And we found problems in that area also. We sampled 167 items and 50% were not recorded either in the CAM system or SOS. Departments were not conducting the required biennial inventories. So they're supposed to do a fixed asset inventory every 2 years. And for example, neither ITA or Sanitation had completed an inventory of CAMS items for over 5 years. And then lastly, RAP and ITA had several items that had been purchased over 1 year prior to our audit that had not been placed in service. Some of the items had been purchased as much as 7 years ago. For example, Recreation and Parks, they had 53 computer monitors that had been in storage for 1 to 2 years that were not placed in service.
Brand new.
Yes, and they acknowledged that part of the problem was that they didn't have a policy in place to use a first in, first out basis. So when the items came in, they would just take one arbitrarily off the shelf without ensuring that the oldest one went out on the floor first.
So another fact that departments aren't following the rules, the regulations, the procedures established to keep the city running smooth in an efficient manner. So Sanitation, Recs and Parks, ITA, what was the response from the departments that you audited?
They generally agree with the findings. As part of our follow-up process, we track the statuses, and we do that every 6 months. We send out memos requesting an updated status, and they're still in progress of implementing several of the recommendations.
And this audit covered from July 07 to July 09, and they still haven't given you the information.
Well, again, every 6 months, they turn in a status report to us, and we evaluate that status report.
But I thought you said they didn't turn it in.
No, they do every 6 months.
Oh, wait a second. If we have items missing,
Well, we specifically never followed up on those, that 25%. We never got back with the departments, and they never reported those as
okay, no,
being fully found.
and how much, did we calculate how much we spend annually on fixed assets and equipment? Any estimate of how much we spend in tax dollars obtaining these items?
No, that number's not included in our report.
That would be, I think, a pretty high number.
Let's see.
Are there any representatives from here from the departments that were audited? ITA controller, come on forward and take your seat on the firing line. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Beverly Dembo. I'm an Assistant General Manager in ITA.
Okay, Beverly, let me mark that down here. And you, ma'am?
Michelle McManus, Head of Admin Services for Bureau of Sanitation.
And you, sir?
Robert Morales, Recreation and Parks, Head of Admin Services.
How come Muckery didn't come?
I can't answer that.
Get him in here and really have a fun time, huh? So they send the people to take the shots for them.
No.
Well, the general managers obviously are the ones responsible to make sure it's done right. So I'll go down the line. Tell me what the response from the department based upon the controller's audit on how it affects your department.
Well, how it affects our department on two other things. One, some of the items they couldn't find at the time of the audit was we have a lot of staff out in the field actually using the equipment. So on one day I can find what was in question, 4 digital cameras. I could find those 4 digital cameras. On the next day when I bring in the auditor, they're out in the field with the park rangers. So we have to try to call them back and try to work that out. But we do find the equipment.
But don't they put down digital cameras so-and-so assigned to some aspect of the department?
That's one of the things we're working out, and we have worked out, is sign out for equipment, which some people over the years get laxed on. We have to bring up those policies and practices again.
Because that's important, whether it is it's a radio, it's a camera, I don't care if it's a shovel. I mean, everything costs money. There should be a tracking system
Sign out loud.
on everything, so we don't lose things. Digital cameras oftentimes disappear.
Yes.
Okay, Beverly, how about you?
So I do not have the stats on the follow-up of the 25% that the controller reports as missing, but I do know that there was some follow-up, and I can get those stats for you.
Okay.
I was prepared today to respond more specifically on the findings and that went out in the report to us on May 3rd, and kind of the status on those. So
Okay,
those-
go ahead, proceed with that then.
Okay.
Thank you.
So there was, one of the issues that we have today is the lack of good systems to support asset management, because there are 2 systems, the SOS system for computer hardware and the CAM system for other fixed assets over $5,000 in value. And they both are pretty obsolete and have a lot of challenges, so that there was a recommendation that we look at a new system. And of course, up until now, we haven't pursued that very much because of the lack of funding to do that. There is an assets management component of FMS, and we do own the licenses, but the implementation cost and the customization cost would probably be extremely high. So that was the one. We have, both in 2010 and in 2011 in ITA, done some audits, and right now there are only 37 items total in ITA that are less than 5.5 years old that we've been unable to locate. So I know we are not in that 25% range anymore, because 37 items and we have a total of 4,512. So although I don't have all of the exact numbers, we're in a much lower range right now. And there was a question about tracking of non-computer hardware that is worth less than $5,000, because right now, citywide, I don't believe that assets less than $5,000 are required to be tracked. And we are looking at some alternatives for that, and the due date of that was December of this year, so we're not done with that review yet.
Because $5,000, I mean, you can buy computers a lot less than $5,000. You can buy cameras, and as the prices keep coming down, lower and
Right,
lower.
so that applies though not to hardware. 2 different tracking systems, one for computer hardware, one for other assets. And it's the other asset system, which could include furniture and just not computer hardware, that today this policy citywide is that there's no requirement to track assets that are less than $5,000. It's
Yes,
not that people couldn't.
But if we track that, we'd really have a mess on our hands trying to find things,
I
like
think
maybe
we
cell
would, and
phones.
at this point, with all of the attrition, I think we'd have an issue with resources to do the work, just to track it, to get it into the system and track it.
Well, I know with neighborhood councils, there were a number of neighborhood councils that purchased items, computers, cameras, equipment, and when an audit was done, the neighborhood council folks had termed out, and the items were missing. I'm talking about multiple items, expensive items. Nobody knows what happened to them. It just
Now,
disappeared.
as far as neighborhood councils go, and I would stand open to correction on this, but I don't believe we track those those items at
No,
all.
no, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about
Right.
Department of Neighborhood Empowerment and their
Yes.
responsibility. No, this isn't
Yes.
apply to your
So
department.
it's not system?
No, no, no. It's, there's got to be, anytime someone gets an item from the city, a cell phone, for example, maybe it's $400, $300, $200, whatever, there should be a way of tracking that. And with neighborhood councils, they put in the requisition for printers, Xerox machine, whatever the case may be. And they get the item, and then when an audit's done a couple years later, no one can find anything. I mean, that's how poorly we track within the 90-plus neighborhood councils. And it just, and the expense is exorbitant when you look at replacement parts and replacement, I mean, the initial purchase. I mean, we don't really purchase wholesale. It seems like we purchase retail plus, but we should be purchasing wholesale. Because I'm a wholesale purchaser. If
Yeah.
it's not on a deal, I don't buy it.
For neighborhood council, I just don't believe they even have access to these systems. So
That's another
it's
problem.
unlikely that they even track it in these systems. Whereas the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment, they would for their purchases, but for the folks in the council, they would not have access.
Yeah, and it just
Yeah.
disappears. Okay, let's hear from, wait, I'll get it. I wrote it down. McManus.
Michelle. That's
Michelle, you own
correct.
the department store, McManus Department Store?
No, I wish.
They went out of.
I wouldn't be here. I
They went out
didn't.
of, no, they went out of business, though.
Either way.
Okay.
We had extensive discussions with Controller's Office. With sanitation's a little bit unique in that half of our major program, the SCM program, is an enterprise fund. As such, it has special fiduciary responsibilities, which include an extensive asset management system. CAMS is not designed for enterprise funds. And we track not only movable equipment, we actually track vehicles in it, we track pipes, the sewer pipelines, as well as large pieces of all of your large pieces of equipment that are part of the treatment plant. To do this, we have an extensive internal system to the Department of Public Works, and everything is tracked within that system. So we do track everything over 5,000 or more that is part of the SCM program. It is just contained in an internal system. There's a few pieces of equipment that are actually, and most of our equipment is purchased through the capital program. It is not in your traditional equipment list that is part of the regular budget. For those pieces of equipment that are in the regular budget, we try to put them in. Unfortunately, that's where there were some, it's not that they were put in, but they were not properly described, and there were some things missing. But they are certainly tracked, and our system provides for depreciation as well as a number of other features that the CAM system doesn't provide. Regarding our systems equipment, we also have an extensive internal system, and the internal system just doesn't track the value. It tracks licensing, it tracks when the guarantees are, and when maintenance contracts end, and Controller, when they did test for that system, found that it was very complete. In fact, it came in very handy because when we're also we had an extensive Oracle audit. We came out 100% flawless on that, mostly because of our internal system. So sanitation, and on the solid side where we do not have yet an internal system that tracks all of its assets, basically the main assets are, of course, the refuse collection vehicles, which are tracked through general services, and we have and the other big asset is all of our containers, and we have an internal system that tracks all of the containers that are distributed, and the amount of containers in house. We were very appreciative. Controller did find a couple of things that needed to be shored up. In terms of small things, and actually CAMS is designed, I think, particularly to track things that are mobile, that can easily be misplaced, taken through theft. And of course, we don't have a lot, but we do have things like cameras and televisions. Frankly, I don't think your regular TVs are of much value anymore. They seem to be pretty secure, but particularly cameras, and there are other smaller items which don't fit into the $5,000 category, but they can be easily misplaced. We choose to have them on internal, just divisional spreadsheets, and they did find that there were problems there where there were cameras missing or unaccounted for, and so we are definitely shoring up. We've gotten spreadsheets from within our divisions. We thought that was the easiest thing to do, and we will be doing actually internal audits, say every 6 months, to check those spreadsheets, and if the model numbers or cameras are not accounted for, then we do our own personal investigation.
So it sounds like it is inconsistent with the city departments as far as how it's done. The $5,000 troubles me because there's many items, printers, I mean, there's so many items you can purchase much less than $5,000. God knows what happens to those. I mean, to buy a state-of-the-art Canon digital camera 70 is about $1,600, and that's a retail price, not the wholesale price. So say you get it for $1,300, I wouldn't even track it, and that is a state-of-the-art digital camera. And if we're looking at 5,000 above, I would venture to say that the items less than 5,000 that we're not really tracking are finding legs and disappearing with this tight budget. I mean, if it was up to me, I'd track everything, and it'd be consistent with every department. I know the police department has a tracking mechanism, equipment, guns, etc., handcuffs, etc. There's a sheet, and each officer has that, and they document that, and they check, I think it's twice or once a year. So at least there's some type of a follow-up if something turns up missing. But I think what we show, what the controller's audit showed, is it's not coordinated. It's kind of a haphazard, we have this, we have that. There's no real central type of program that is universal. And the 5,000, again, troubles me that I think that cost is way too high. And then when the estimated life of 3 years, it may be in great shape, but it's a serious situation of how we're accounting for our $7 billion budget and what we're purchasing and what's currently used, what's not used. This, to me, is an example of equipment, fixed assets and equipment, that we could throw something up in the air and say, this would be the number. And still, we got departments that weren't audited by the controller, and God knows what we'd find in those departments. I mean, you're the folks that got audited. Just imagine the other departments and what we would come up with or not come up with. So I have some real concerns about what mechanisms we have, how we track, and the fact is there's still a lot of stuff that's missing. I would say 5,000 and less, and then what we have that's been documented by the controller's audit, the 5,000 above.
Yeah, on page 16 of our report, we talk about assets under $5,000 and recommend that those also be tracked in some manner, at least certain items that are highly susceptible to theft.
Because, I mean, you're talking, the technology improves, the costs come down, and you get a whole, I mean, 5,000 and above, you're talking some major purchases. Most stuff you can buy a lot less than $5,000. Mr. Englander.
Sir, thank you. Thank you for coming to this as well. I just have some questions in terms of looking at it from, I'm going to take a different approach. And not to address so much the audit itself and ask those particular questions, because quite frankly, I think it would be a waste of all of your time, because I think the audit speaks for itself. This is one of, I think, the most shocking audits that I've seen. We've got potentially millions of dollars in equipment that we have no idea where it's at. So my question is, and you mentioned it, the controller's office mentioned it as policy. I haven't seen a response, and perhaps there's one, on each department and what their policy is, and if their policy has been revisited on asset management? Where's the leadership from the general managers to show that they have looked at this audit, they've seen the results are poor at best. These are potentially millions, if not billions of dollars over the years in equipment that is probably a good portion of it is missing. And if you can imagine the stories, I've certainly heard them as well. We purchase equipment and they grow legs, and oftentimes they do disappear. So my concern isn't over the camera or the cell phone, it's over everything holistically and looking at it from a policy perspective and a leadership perspective and what the general managers are doing or fail to do in providing and updating those policies. Not so much as attrition, not so much as not having enough folks on board now because of early retirement and the problems financially with the city, and I understand all that. But this has been going on from the beginning of time. I went to public schools, and I remember they never had any sophisticated system, and we wanted to check out a volleyball. We went up to a little room, and we had to sign our name and got the volleyball or the basketball out. As an LAPD officer, we have kit rooms. And before they had electronic systems, they had a guy standing there, and if you needed a shotgun, if you needed another vest, if you needed to borrow something, you signed out for it. And what would happen then is if you didn't clock it back in, they would call you at home that night, in the middle of the night, and say, "Where's the radio?" Which happened to me once. My radio was left in my holster, didn't turn it back in at the end of the shift, and I got a call at home in the middle of the night, and I said, I you know what, I didn't realize it. I left it. It's in my locker. I left it on my Sam Brown on my belt, and I'll bring it in the first thing tomorrow. And he said, "That's great. No, you won't. You'll get out of bed. You'll drive down to the station. You'll go to your locker. You'll check it back into the kit room before I finish my shift, so I can show all the equipment was checked in under my watch." I said, "Okay," and I did. It's not a matter of having the tools in terms of money to allocate towards software and sophistication when this has been done for years, for many, many years, from, again, the elementary school level all the way up to, I think a great example is what the police department does, quite frankly, where they track everything. And I'm not quite sure when ITA had mentioned 37 items. It sounds out of 4,500. I'm sure that ITA has more than 4,000 items, and 37, I wasn't sure if those were numbers or categories, but there's nothing to look at here from the report. I'm really looking for the policy. What are we doing to change it since we've seen the audit? What are we doing to recognize and not just answer for the 25% or look for that missing phone or laptop, but what are we doing so 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we don't say, well, we complained we didn't have the money, we didn't have the sophistication, we didn't have the resources, we didn't have the automated systems in place, we didn't have the personnel to enter the information in, is going to be, quite frankly, the story coming back to this committee 5, 10, 20 years from now if we don't do something now. So what I'd like to see back is a report from each general manager on their updated policies and what procedures can take place with the restraints they have now to track these systems. We've got a responsibility not only to the departments but to the residents, the taxpayers of Los Angeles, to ensure we are tracking these. I've heard every nightmare and horror story you can imagine, as I'm sure all of you have, and they're real. And, it's a reality. And so we can't wait until we're in better financial shape because, quite frankly, there's so many other priorities that have to be funded first, like paving our streets and trimming our trees and fixing our sidewalks and making sure we have enough public safety and you all have enough personnel to update the systems we're always talking about and invest in all the critical core functions of the city. This is going to be the last thing that gets funded. We all know that. And so if we have to go back to a manual paper system, it really starts with policy and then enforcing the policy and then having the leadership to reward those who are following it so we can highlight them as examples to the departments and say, look at what a great job so-and-so did for tracking this. They were responsible for this one office or this one park or this one building with all these assets in it. And this is the system they created internally to ensure they were following up with their policy. And then if they don't, we hold those employees and the supervisors accountable for not following the policy. And if they don't follow the policy and they've been warned, they get fired or they get reprimanded. I don't think it's that complicated. So I really don't want to sit here and actually go through an audit that really lacks information that can even possibly come back to satisfy this committee, quite frankly. And I don't blame any of you. I think we've all inherited this from years and years and years and years of just neglect and oversight and not having systems in place just because we're all so busy doing so many other things. And by the time you put in a request for equipment, by the time you actually get that funded, the purchase order goes in and it comes back, it's already out in the field. You're not even thinking twice about, did we have a system of checking it out? And everybody is so busy, and I get that. We have a big city to run. We've got a lot of other functions and responsibilities to do, which is why the policy then gets trickled down. So I'd like to see, if I could, from the chair, if he'll indulge me with that, is a report back to this committee from every general manager on their policies in place, what they've done to update those policies since the audits come out, and then we can let's make examples out of the ones who've done a great job. Let's have them come back and talk about best practices and what works and how we can utilize that information for other departments and try to get in front of this. So hopefully 2, 3, 4 years, 5 years down the road, we won't be having these same discussions.
Well, I think that's a wonderful plan, but some of the things I want to tack onto that, $222 million deficit next year, that's what it's projected to be. According to the audit, unable to find nearly 45% of the items purchased with taxpayers' money. This is a letter from our controller to the mayor, to the city attorney, and to members of the council. Found, although some items were ultimately found in the wrong locations, dozens of items worth nearly $1 million still cannot be found. Found items worth hundreds of thousands of dollars during physical inventories have not been logged in to be monitored. Located 138 items that appear to be worth nearly $250,000 purchased years ago, sitting in the warehouse or staging areas unused. No one is minding the store. We do not have a consistent policy to track. 59 items unable to locate at a cost of $938,000, such as video recorder, and $250,000, 2 gas analyzers purchased by Bureau of Sanitation for $250,000. IT and Rex and Parks, 130 items that were purchased last year, still in warehouse or staging areas. Items worth $237,000. Some were purchased over 7 years ago. Some items not placed into service included 9 microwaves, 1 deep fryer, and 2 television sets by Rex and Parks, and various computer equipment by ITA. Departments are supposed to conduct a physical inventory of items every 2 years to maintain accurate physical inventories. IT and Sanitation have not conducted a review in at least 5 years, and Rex and Parks has not done one in 7 years. So everybody's negligent, everybody. So the general managers are the ones who are accountable and responsible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue this item. The general managers are ordered to come to this committee for the next hearing and explain what they're doing to correct the situation. So you can come with the general manager, but I want the general managers from the departments that are listed to explain why they haven't complied with the directive 7 years and 5 years, and why we have items just sitting around collecting dust. You folks are workers, general managers are managers. They're the ones who are ultimately accountable and responsible. So I respect the fact you're here speaking on behalf of your departments, but I want the general managers in here so they can get the message from me, Mr. Englander, before it goes to council, and find out what they're going to do, and let them know we're not pleased with this at all. But this is not only the 3 departments. This, I'm sure, if we go to every single department, we're going to have the same problem, but we're going to set an example with these 3 individuals to let them know that we're serious about doing what they need to do. and administering the policy. I mean, 7 years they haven't done it, 5 years they haven't done it, and we're talking, if we're talking $5,000, we're talking literally millions of dollars that have, that can't be accounted for. So what we're doing, Mr. Engler, is continuing this item.
Okay.
We're going to have the general managers from these departments come to this committee, they're ordered to this committee, and to give an explanation as to why they haven't complied with the existing directives, why they've waited 5 years, why they've waited 7 years, and maybe this will be a message to other general managers, that if the mayor's not going to take the task, we will take it to task in this committee, Audit and Government Efficiency. So, again, the message is very clear. Get on board or get off the ship. Anything else?
No, I'll second that.
So we will continue this to the next meeting and let the general managers know that there are just 3 of the examples, and I thank the controller for bringing this forward. The letter, I don't know if you folks saw the letter, but it really lays out the negligence. Again, general managers are going to be the ones that are going to be ultimately held responsible, millions and millions of dollars that isn't following the policy. So thank you for the representatives for being here. I appreciate that. So this item will be continued to our next meeting. Number 2, please.
Item number 2, City Controller reports relative to an audit of the city's real property trust fund and related matters. This item has also been referred to the Information Technology and General Services Committee.
Okay, who's here?
Me again.
Okay.
This audit was issued on February 10th, 2010. The objective was to determine the impact on the city's general fund of the city's policy to deposit only a portion of revenues into the general fund related to the sales of surplus properties and oil pipeline franchise fees. For sales of surplus properties, the administrative code stipulates that 50% of proceeds shall be deposited into the general fund and 50% shall be deposited into the applicable council district's real property trust funds. The amount deposited to the council district funds is based on the council district in which the property was sold. There are a few exceptions to this rule. For example, proceeds from property sold in the Venice area go 100% to the Venice area surplus real property fund. It's more complicated for oil pipeline revenues. For those, 50% goes to the general fund and 50% goes in total to council district funds. However, of the amount that goes to council district funds, 50% is allocated evenly to each of the 15 council districts, and the other 50% is split based on the square footage of pipeline in the districts. So let's say the total revenue brought in is $150,000, and $75,000 would go to the general fund. A total of $75,000 would go to council district funds. So for the council district funds, half of that, $37,500, would be distributed equally to all 15 council districts, and each council district would get $2,500. And then the remaining $37,500 would be split based on the square footage of the pipeline in those respective districts.
And what can they use that money for?
Boy, we have it somewhere in our report.
Asset management tracking.
It's basically anything related to I think the acquisition and maintenance of properties. Let's see. Should be right up here.
It says 25 million has gone into council members' discretionary accounts over the last 12 years.
As an example, and while we're looking up that information, a lot of that money has been used for major capital improvement infrastructure projects. A great example of just one of those was the Northridge Pool, which cost an estimated $6 million to rebuild after the earthquake and was closed down for 10 years. Council members have used that along with working with the community for those major projects which aren't funded any longer, and a lot of those discretionary funds have dried up. A lot of community folks have called those slush funds, but in fact, over the last, well, I'd say since the onset of neighborhood councils that have really evolved in paying attention and getting involved in creating those partnerships with council offices, is another example. We used some of that money where we partnered with the neighborhood council and bought a piece of property to set aside as permanent equestrian property that was in threat of development. And so that's where, if you look at not where the money can be used for, it's the history of where it in fact has been used. And I think you'll find, surprisingly, that the majority of it, from our research, has been that it has actually gone back into those communities that have been neglected over the years on those major infrastructure projects. So I'd just like to add that as well.
Thank you. And the controller did, when she was a council member, and this was approved by the council, to shift all that money to the general fund to help with the lacking dollar, the few dollars that we had. But that was only for a short term.
That was for 2 years, and it was solely for the sales of surplus property, not for the oil pipeline.
And the oil, most of it comes from the oil pipeline. Nearly 25 million, 7.3 resultant oil pipeline. Okay, and 17 from surplus property. So do we have an accounting of each district, how much they have?
Well, we do as of the time of the audit on page,
Because
attachments,
I'm looking for that.
attachment,
Page 18.
Oh, I think it's way in the back.
yeah, like
There we go.
19, page,
18 is the
page 19, it shows the
pipeline
balances
footage.
Okay, 19.
as of September 30th, 2009.
Okay. See, some people get like 84,000 versus 1,000,006. The lowest is 81,000. The highest is 1,000,006.
But these are the total numbers. Is this
the balance.
Is this okay? This is the balance, and is this the 50% portion, reflective portion, or is this the totality of
It would
the
be-
transaction?
It would be the 50% that's left over that hasn't been spent yet.
Okay.
Because obviously sometimes the money comes in and then the money's spent. So these are just the balances as a particular points in time.
Right. So we should go ahead and sweep CD 15 since it's vacant anyway, right? Is that your suggestion?
All right. We're saving money.
Anybody here to oppose that? Speak up.
We're saving money right now. We're saving money on CD 15, but that will end shortly.
And then the revenue schedules are on page, for example, page 20 has the revenues by district for sales of surplus property revenue.
So let's instruct the CIO to issue their report listing all available special funds with instruction what the council needs to do to have those deposited in the general fund. Continue for 60 days. Staff will work together to hold a joint ITGA, Audit Government Efficiency meeting, to hear CAO report back. So we can continue this.
If I could, I would recommend that this be taken up actually as part of the budget deliberations, and instruct that this be sent not to the budget committee, but budget instructions as they're preparing next year's budget with a $200+ million deficit, and that this could be taken into context with the council offices weighing in as well, but be headed by the budget chair.
Well, the CAO is here to have a couple comments. Ramon.
If we could ask the CAO to weigh in on that recommendation that I just made on, so we can take a holistic approach rather than it just coming out of committee.
Stand in for Miguel, huh?
Never. Good afternoon.
Were you out trick-or-treating last night with your 12 kids? I was thinking about that.
So, for the record, only 7 kids. and no, I stayed home and watched a football game.
What a good dad you are.
So, for the record, though,
My colleague was out trick-or-treating with his two daughters.
I was.
but somebody's got to, hand out the candy. So that
I was
my
just
job.
trying to keep my daughter safe from other
I was working, it's okay.
people.
All right.
Given the neighborhood, I understand your concerns. Certainly with the item today, obviously there are a number of policy implications and issues here, and I think it certainly is appropriate to view these revenues that go into trust funds as part of the larger picture, and I think it would be appropriate as we move forward to look at how it fits into that larger piece as far as the city's deficit.
Because the deficit, when it wasn't here, this was money that we could use for discretionary purposes, but when the deficit is here, cutting police and fewer fire stations and, the core function of government, when we have to make those cutbacks, when we could take money and appropriate so we can maintain those essential services. I'm not talking about services that aren't essential. I'm talking about services that are essential. We've made cutbacks with the fire department. We made cutbacks with the police department. We made cutbacks in a lot of different departments. So we need to look at how we can get dollars to fund those for the people of Los Angeles.
Which is why I recommend in the budget discussions, in fact,
That starts in April?
well, it starts prior to that.
Yeah, the mayor will certainly, as two departments, he's conveyed his priorities for the following year, and so we will go through the process. Departments will submit their budget proposals December 9th.
December.
We'll get into committee somewhere after April 20th is when we'll actually get into Budget and Finance Committee.
That's when April comes around. Okay.
Right, when it comes back to council, but that's after the preliminary budget is released. With that, as just another example, when we talk about core services, we use some of these slush funds, if you will, discretionary funds, slush funds to put a new trailer at the Devonshire Police Station and equip it with technology and utilize it because we were out of space at the station, and there was no money left in the bond to do so, and so we needed. That request had been put in for a number of years, and there were no funds to do it. The department didn't have the necessary funds to do it. And so I think looking at this, if people have ongoing identified projects already, those are that had what has come up and come out of the budget discussions in previous years, that then there could be an encumbered amount of money if you could have an identified project already in the pipeline that goes perhaps to a core function. Those are policy discussions that should come out of that budget process, and I'd like to see it come out of that budget process, and not just flip a coin whether we should throw the money in or not, but have some real policy teeth into, how the money is spent and where, and then if it's not encumbered on those particular types of core function services, then it should be swept and perhaps put into the general fund. But that's why it should go through the budget deliberation process.
Okay, well, we can do that, but first I want to bring it back here. We'll bring it back here and we can make a recommendation, because we're going to have ITJ and this committee hear what comes back, and then we'll have time to send it on to budget. But we needed to come back to this committee first, so if we can get that done. And there may be other funds that are available in addition to what we're traditionally used to. And that'll give it an opportunity to wash through it and maybe find some more that we can put into
And
the budget.
perhaps if you could look at, that's a great idea, if there are any council members termed out within the next 2 years, perhaps, if they have any funds left that look like they're over and above their budget, we can sweep those funds and put them back into the general fund. I think it would be a good
idea.
start.
That's a good idea. We can do that. If any council members have those funds available. Well, we won't know until we do the research. So that'll be the recommendations. We'll bring this back in 60 days, and then you can have a couple months to work on this.
Thank you.
That's plenty of time for you, because you're an efficient individual. Mr. Controller, anything else? Or Mr., you're not the controller. You're deputy controller.
No, that's it.
Anything else? All right.
Adjourned.
We are adjourned. Thank you very much.